I do want to say welcome to the official first book club
Oh
because
yeah.
we finally started moving towards a more official format. I think Squid and I are really like full tilts on trying to make this more of like a consumable product, like where maybe if you miss a week, you'll still be interested in watching a video if I can cut it up together. Because the real indicator that we have a product is Squid and I came up with a gimmick, and I think gimmicks are the true testament to whether or not something is a product or not. So Squid, you want to go ahead and tell people what our gimmick is while I set up
Uh,
my lighting a little better.
oh sure, you probably should do that. But I guess this the gimmick is we're gonna oscillate between fun. I don't know the correct terms here, like literary stuff readings, and then some more like a scientific like facts about the world kind of readings. If that makes sense. And the structure of it's gonna be more. This is the whole book instead of going chapter by chapter like we did for several weeks here with Name of the Wind, which
Yeah,
has its benefit, but also has its drawbacks. So
yeah. It's kind of like I don't know. What I'd like is because I was thinking about it because I do love how deep dive we went into every 10 chapters. We were talking about stuff in super intense detail. Like that's super cool. But I think two things. One, both you and I are very detail oriented. I guess I shouldn't speak for you, but I mean myself. Like I'm
how dare
pretty.
you?
Yeah. Say again.
I said, how dare you?
How
But keep
dare
going.
you? But I think even if we cover the whole book, you and I are going to hone in on details no matter what.
There's
We're
some stuff
just
that's too good to skip.
e-
Honestly, it's just too good. Like,
exactly. Um, so I'm not too worried about that. And eventually, once we have this, once all of you tell all of your friends how cool we are and how much people should come hang out in book club, and we grow this to millions of people, um, the Discord that Sid and I are using for video chat, we can add people into it, and then we can discuss chapter by like we can have channels to be like, okay, if you're this far in the book, like let's talk about it, and we can talk about it during the week, like in a text chat, and then
because
bring that
you
stuff.
don't necessarily have to lose out in that discussion just because we're not doing it
Exactly,
in this format.
exactly. I think that would be super dope. Squid, why don't you give them a little bit of a precursor of the book that you're going to choose for next week and maybe a little bit of Name of the Wind? Because you drinking that water made me realize that I don't have any and I want some because I'm
Dude, you
jealous.
gotta stay hydrated, man.
Gotta stay
That's for.
hydrated.
Did we? Once that great. Oh well, he might. He might.
No, no, no,
Did
I
we
can
pick
hear you. I can't.
Theta Food? I'm assuming we did. All right, cool. All right, so the book we'll be reading for next week is or next 2 weeks. I don't know how Drake wants to structure it. Is The Fate of Food by Amanda Little, and it is like this fantastic overview of the industrial food system. Pretty much what it takes to go from the sun supplying energy to plants to getting food in the supermarket and into your onto your dinner table. So I'm pretty amped to go through this stuff because I think it's pretty eye opening and it's pretty important to remember that the stuff you buy in the store does not generate spontaneously to end up on the shelf. There's a lot of supply chain and industrial processes behind what it takes to get it there. So it makes you generally more appreciative of the world to learn some of the facts that's in this book. And I think it's good lessons to have. And then the book we just read, Name of the Wind, has got to be one of the best like written prose wise, I guess, fantasy things that I've ever read.
So let's start talking about Name of the Wind. Chat, I want you thinking about kind of like your favorite parts. Let's start with the plot. Like, give a brief overview. Um,
How
what
fast
we
do you think you can do that in,
I
Drake?
got it. I got it. I think I can do it.
Yeah. All
This
right.
whole book starts with us in a world that is pretty much gone to shit. The roads are bad. People don't trust the kingdom. Taxes are high. People are in a rough spot, and we find our main character, Coat, the innkeeper. He's a regular old innkeeper. He's got a friend named Bast who they're running things, and then they start to hear rumors of like things going poorly on the road and that there are these spider demons. Well, turns out that Coat actually knows a little bit more than he lets on. He's kind of the outsider in the town. Coat actually goes out and takes on these demons. He draws them in. He lures them in, and pretty much beats them down. But not before the Chronicler shows up, and he's like, "Why the heck are you out here right now?" And he has to protect the Chronicler. And Squid and I actually talked about, we think he might have been going to essentially commit suicide by a heroic act, by killing these spiders, until the Chronicler showed up and he realized he had to save them. And that's important because it's important about Coat's character, because later we find out that Coat is not Coat. His name is Quoth. He used to be this huge hero. He used to be this giant hero that was like a super powerful on the like stage of a guy named Taborlin the Great, who's a mythical figure in this world's history of a person who can call the name of the wind, and if you can call the name of something, you can control it completely. So you can control stone, you can control wind, you can control fire, it doesn't matter. Taborlin the Great had this ability. Now, the Chronicler was actually looking for Quoth when he found Coat, who turns out to be Quoth. Now, the Chronicler, all he wants is Quoth's story, but he has to pull it out of him, convince him that he should tell it. Coat finally agrees. Once he agrees, he says, "I need 3 full days." So the next 3 days are going to be full of Coat telling his entire story of how he became Quoth. Now, Quoth, we dive into the story when he's very young, because when he's very young, he's a member of the Edema Rue, which is an acting troupe. It forms his life, it shapes his life. And one of the most significant, 2 significant things from his childhood is, one, he meets Ben, or Abinthy, who teaches him about sympathy and other educational pursuits. Sympathy is super important because it's the science magic. We're going to refer to it in this stream as the science magic of the world. AKA, it controls energy. You can connect things to each other and control them. So if I have my water bottle, and I can imagine with an iron hard will that the water in this is the same as the water in my kitchen, I can connect those 2 waters together. And if I heat this water, it will heat that water with a percentage of loss depending on how much I believe that they are connected. Sympathy is important. He teaches them sympathy. And the second most important thing is his entire troop dies. Yeah. They're murdered by who we find out to be the Chandran. They're these crazy mythical beasts, or like mythical figures out of history. And the important quote from when Quoth sees them is that they say, "Someone's father has been singing exactly the wrong songs."
And this is when Quoth's 12 years old, and for reference, his troop also includes his mother and father, and it's pretty effectively his whole family. So after that happens, he's an orphan.
So both his biological and his whole family, every type of family, wiped out completely. Now, he's at a loss. He is driven into lizard brain, is what we'll call it a lot in this stream, of just he can't even think. And he is forced into this, he learns how to play his guitar even better because he retreats into his music. Then he eventually has to go to a city in order to survive. And he lives in that city for 3 years in abject poverty. He's pickpocketing, he's stealing, he's begging. Abject poverty does not even begin to describe what this boy goes through. It is an incredibly harrowing series of events that befall him in Tarbeen. But finally, he's brought out of that lizard brain feeling because he hears a story about the Chandran, and it sparks
the origin story of how the Chandran came to be.
The origin story of the Chandran, exactly right. And so that spawns him into thinking, well, I've got to do it. I've got to find out more. So he goes to the university, which is what Abinthy told him. That's where you learn. That's where you learn new things. And he goes in, and he knows that he's 5 years too early to be in the university. They don't let people his age in. Plus, it costs money to go to the university, which he doesn't have. So he has to be the best. He has to prove himself. And he does. He blows away the admissions. He's the first ever person to get a scholarship to go to the university. And he busts his way in. Of course, he immediately starts causing problems because, like, he's a big flame. He's flaming hot. Like, he's this big, huge personality, and he's causing problems. But the professors either love him or they hate him. He's made enemies. He's made 3 or 4 enemies, but he starts to get this reputation. He starts, like, things are happening and things get blown out of proportion, like things do when people don't know all of the facts. He starts becoming the bloodless. He was whipped and he didn't have to, and he took off his shirt to take it on his raw skin. He didn't bleed when they whipped him. He didn't lose consciousness when they whipped him. So he's gaining knowledge. He's super smart. He's smarter than anyone else. He's this incredible figure, and he's already starting to get this reputation. And then as he's at the university, he starts to make friends. I can't remember their names. Sydney, can you?
Will and Sim.
Yeah, Willem and Simmons, like, definitely those. Savoy is a good one. And then he overworks himself. Like all of us do. But he slowly starts to get back into his music, and his friends rescue him from that, and then help him audition to become a musician at the biggest pub in town. And it's this huge honor. He goes and he auditions, and he requires someone to sing with him, but he doesn't have any with him, so he requires someone from the audience to do it. And this is important because this is where we meet again the woman of the story, the one that it's all about, and her name is Denna. Now, Denna, he met on the road to the university. When he left Tarbine, he met her there, and it was a magical experience. The experience they had together, it was incredible. And out of chance, he meets her again at this during his audition, because he asks someone to join in, and she does. She takes the other half of his refrain and jumps right in and saves his audition, and it's incredible. And then they start to form this relationship. He tries to find her on days. He accidentally, walks by her place when he's in town. It starts to become this strange relationship back and forth between the two of them, where they're struggling to kind of figure out the way, like, the form of their relationship, because she's often, like, kind of courting these nobles, but they have this beautiful relationship together. And he can't really figure it out because he knows nothing about women, like 0%. Just nope. He knows everything about sympathy. He knows everything about science and crafting and, like, all these things, but he can't figure out women. And so it's obvious to all his friends that she's obsessed with him. But, like, you start, as the reader, see, like, there's something more to their relationship than the relationship she has with all her suitors. Like, because he doesn't push her, because these are details. This is not plot. This is something we'll talk about later. Sorry, I love the relationships, so I'll get sucked into it.
Yeah.
We get this setup of him at the university, and you kind of start to get into this rhythm of he's struggling to pay tuition. He's, like, barely making ends meet, but he's also learning all these great things.
Importantly, on occasion in this period of the book, he, like, starts to reference things that you would traditionally ascribe to a hero doing, and he starts talking about, like, you know what, the hero thing is something that he's, like, enjoys doing. If that makes sense. You get these little bits and pieces of him, like, saving someone, and he's all about it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how much to go into, like, plot summary wise about what happens at the university, which is, like, trials and tribulations, I guess, of him trying to stay funded to keep going to school.
I think one thing more we should note about the university is he meets Ari. Yeah. She's this homeless, tiny little girl that he just happens to meet essentially in the sewers of the university. And he kind of takes care of her, like, but at the same time, it's this beautiful friendship that they have, where he brings her stuff and they talk in super poetic things. Like, he'll bring her water, and he'll say, and she'll ask, well, what did you bring me? And he'll say, well, I brought you the moon. And she'll say, no, you couldn't have. And he goes, you're right, I couldn't quite catch the moon, but I took the starlight and tucked it at the bottom. Like, beautiful things like that, things that we all wish that we could say. So all of, like like we're skipping over most of like the tiny events at the university. The other important person is, in fact, his arch nemesis is, I think, the best way to describe him. You want to go into this because I know you love like that like contention a lot. Like I remember a lot of your favorite moments have been when he's kind of like messed that guy up.
So this dude named Ambrose this is like a really powerful noble's son who was going to school at the university. He's just a all around dick. The first interaction Voth has with him, he's like kind of pushing himself onto this girl who's like, one of his coworkers, and Voth like wins the interaction and just makes Ambrose be like just embarrasses him pretty much, and that starts this whole big long cycle of them going after each other. And throughout the whole book, I'd say it pretty steadily escalates the degree of the contentiousness between the two and like what actions they take and that kind of stuff. Um, at the end of the book, it eventually culminates with Ambrose trying to smash Quoth's loot and Quoth freaking out and being like, "No, sir," and then almost getting expelled from the university for again, sort of something to do with Ambrose. It's a fun interaction. And then eventually they end up Quoth ends up hearing about a murder, or not a murder, massacre. It's a massacre really at this wedding party up in like this town in the middle of nowhere. And when he hears about it, he hears the people talking about it mention blue flame, which is a typical sign of the Chandrian. So he's like, okay, I've got to go investigate this because this is like my one opportunity to learn real-time facts about what could happen with the Chandrian and that kind of stuff. So he goes up there to find out what the hell happened at this wedding. Finds out 22 people got killed in the wedding. The Chandrian were definitely there because of the blue fire. It matches their general motif really.
And because metal had rusted and rotted and was falling away. Because we
Several
find
of those
out later
right.
that the blue fire is actually also attributed to another creature.
And then, suspiciously, I think, he runs into Denna as the lone survivor of the massacre, and you spend, a good many pages with Kavoth and Denna trying to work out what happened. And then you kind of get to the end of the book. Kavoth, there's this big thing called a Dracus, which is pretty much just a dragon. It's like a real world dragon. It just eats trees and stuff, but it does breathe fire. And there's one that has been addicted to this substance called dinner resin, because there's this guy out in the woods farming it, like you would. It's illegal. Farming the trees, just kind of collected like maple syrup by draining a tree. And the thing eats trees, right? So one day it came along and ate one of the dinner resin trees, got addicted to it, and now it's just this drug crazed, 6-ton alligator thing that can breathe fire, right? Except its skin is imbued with the iron from what it eats. So it's just crazy freaking monster, right? Mm-hmm. And then Kavoth and Denna realize that they have to kill the thing because it's going to go crazy because it associates the dinner resin with people. They poison it they try and OD it on dinner resin, but it's a 6-ton huge thing, and doesn't quite kill it. They just make it super freaking high and crazy. And then the monster goes into the local town. Is it Trevin? Is that what the name of the town was, Jake? Yeah. And there's this long, drawn-out thing where both it ends up doing this really cool, really symbolic bit of sympathy where he uses this great big iron wheel mounted on the front of the church in Trevin, because the iron wheel is symbolic. It's like effectively their cross.
Yeah,
in their whole religious motif stuff. It's just the cross pretty much for comparison. It's this big huge iron wheel, right? And then he uses this sympathy and a magnet to make the big wheel in the front of the church fall down and fall towards the Dracus and kill it and save the town. And that's when Quoth is like, man, I like kind of being a hero kind of stuff. And then eventually Quoth gets back to the university, does the thing with Ambrose, very high plot point, does the thing with Ambrose, ends up accidentally summoning the name of the wind, using the name of the wind to fuck Ambrose up, breaks his arm or something, beats him up, which is a direct break, which is a breach of the laws of sympathy at the university, laws of magic actually at the university. So they try him for malfeasance, which is using magic to hurt someone on purpose. He gets convicted, but he didn't know what he did, and that's how it usually works. Apparently, when someone accidentally first calls the name of something, and so he gets convicted of malfeasance. The charge of expelling him gets dropped. He gets raised to the next rank in the university. He still gets whipped, and then I think that's kind of the end of the book,
Yeah,
right?
we go back to, because what you've got to remember is all of this is being told
Mhm.
in first person from Quoth, who has now become Coat the Innkeeper,
It's
which
like
we
that's all from an active narrative in the story. It's a story within a story, and there's
yes.
all these things happening around in the actual story being told, which is being told at the end to Chronicler and Bast by Quoth. Um, there's also a plot that occurs at that level as well
Yeah.
about stuff going on in the town and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you have to remember that it's all kind of leading to how did this promising young kid end up as an innkeeper? Like it doesn't really track. Like he should have been this huge hero. What happened to like crush him to the point where he is where he is? Because he's kind of a nobody now, and you don't know why. And um, a detail at the end that's really important is we find out that Bast, who is kind of Coates' apprentice in the present, is essentially like he's obsessed with Quoth. He loves this great hero that used to be, and you kind of see that like he wants to learn from Quoth, this great champion, this great hero, and he's worried about him as a friend because he sees him retreating into this innkeeper persona and leaving the hero persona behind. And you find out that the chronicler is actually there because Bast lured him with the idea of a story. It was Bast that wanted him there because he knew that if the chronicler got Quoth to tell his story, that it would remind Quoth of who he was. And that is huge for the plot of the story. Like it's giant, because you kind of realize that the reason this story is being told isn't just to get the story written down. It's Bast's attempt to bring Quoth back, to get rid of Coat the Innkeeper and bring Quoth, the bloodless, the demon, like the King Killer. It is called the King Killer Chronicles. Bring him back. And what we're
That's
all
got to
waiting.
be the most significant like plot segment of the outside narrative, right? Of like not Quoth's story leading up to the point, but like him telling the story. That's got to be the most significant bit of like he's this guy who's clearly dealing with a lot of like depression and like loss of feeling, and Bass is trying to get him back to being his old self. Because whatever happened to make him end up being an innkeeper, still don't know what it is at the end of the first book.
Yeah.
Has also stripped him of all his like potency. Effectively, he's like now the silent guy who doesn't ever do anything fun, I guess.
Yeah. And you also got to remember that like us telling you the plot does not take away at all from like even if you have not read a single page, it's still worth reading everything because one, we skipped over huge amounts of the plot in order to get like kind of the general world. And two, even if we stood here for 6 hours and talked in detail, which we could, about the plot, it is still worth reading because of the way Patrick Rothfuss writes. His quotes, his words, his imagery is beautiful. And it's why Sidney and I, like for me, this is the third time I've read this book, and I still want to pick it right back up and reread it because it's not about the plot. It's the way he constructs his characters and constructs the words that it just keeps you wanting to come back for more. And that's why I think this book is one of the best fantasy fiction books of all time.
It's just fantastic. I think like a really good like summary of that element of his writing style is the I think it's the prologue and the epilogue where he talks about the silences and the Wasteland Inn.
Oh,
The name of
yeah.
the inn
Go
is
off on
the
that,
Wasteland Inn. And the prologue and the epilogue talk about the silence of the inn, And the prologue is of course at the beginning of the book before anything plot happens, and the epilogue is after the plot of the book. Um, and it is like the way it's written is just otherworldly how effective it is at conveying the general, like when you read the prologue, you're like, at least for me, in the first time I read this book, it was like, oh, this is kind of a weird way to begin a fantasy book. It's like very poetic. It's very effective, and it really cuts straight to your emotions, but it's atypical for reading a fantasy book. But then by the time you get to the end of the book and you read the epilogue, the whole time I was reading this thing, I was just getting goosebumps because it's so effective at conveying the gist of like Rothfuss's writing style and the important sections of this book. And like for reference, this is the epilogue. It's literally one page, right? Not even the full page. And I'm pretty sure the prologue is the same. Like it's not lengthy at all.
Kelsey agrees. She says the writing is beautiful. And I think the prologue and the epilogue are great examples of the way that this is a poetry book that Patrick Rothfuss has stitched together and created a beautiful narrative.
I think a while ago you said it well, Drake. Like, how it almost seems like Patrick Rothfuss wrote a bunch of poems, right? And then he was like, "All right, now how do I take these poems and turn them into a plot?" Like that's almost what it feels like.
And that's why I'm scared for the third book. But actually I'm not, because you've told me that these books were written as one book. Like he's planned everything thoroughly. So there is a plot. There is like, speaking of it that way makes me worried that okay, he's created this world and it's beautiful in these stories, but there are all these questions about the people and the things that we want to know, and what if he just never answers them because he's just writing out of passion, writing like poetry. But then you tell me that this whole thing was written as one book, makes me realize no, he's able to do these poetic moments, but also like he has a plan. Everything like he has answers to like, who is Bast? Why did Quoth become Coat? Like the chronicler, how did he find, like everything is super super planned out, and I am so excited for the third book. Oh my gosh, I like, if it never comes out, I'll cry.
Yeah, man.
So
because there's so much you want to know about. Like especially after you read the second book, because you read the first book, you're like, man, I want to know about all this stuff, and then you read the second book, and okay, I've learned about some of it, but there's still a bunch of stuff I want to learn more about. And so if that third one doesn't come out, it's going to be pretty crushing.
Yep. Those of you who just hopped in the chat, I see we've got a couple of viewers. We just wrapped up the plot, and we're about to move on.
In a very loose phrasing.
Yeah, very very loose paraphrasing. I'd love to know if Kelsey, who has read some of it, is like, that was useless, like really not even useful at all. Like you just didn't get, like, or it was just shotgun, like too much information, or if it was useful. We're about to move on. What I'd like to do is Sidney and I are going to discuss a couple, like in brief, a couple of the relationships. I want us to land on 3 that we talk in detail. Pick 2 people, okay, so Denna and Quoth and Ari, or Simon and or in Ambrose. Yeah. Like I want to land on 3 relationships that we really want to cover. And in the meantime, anyone in the chat, I want you to put your favorite plot detail. Like anything that we didn't cover in our brief overview that you like loved about this book, throw it in the chat, and then Squid and I are going to come back and like before we hop into the relationships, we'll all read through it and we can talk about some of the stuff that chat talked about. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Squid?
Absolutely.
So relationships. Let's just throw some out there like that we might want to talk about. I mean, you of course you've got Denna and Quoth.
Yeah, important, yeah. But I think you have a very fundamentally different opinion of that relationship than I do.
I know. That's why. I think we can go ahead and put that one in, because I think.
Yeah, that's what we have to do.
Yeah, we definitely want. Okay, boom. All right, there's our first. Easy. Yeah. Okay, Quoth and Ambrose.
I mean, that's an important plot thing, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how important the nuances of that relationship are. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
You know, like
it's pretty straightforward. They hate each other. They have super harsh quips towards one another. It's brutal. It's awesome. We love it.
yeah.
Well, maybe what about Quoth versus enemies and like how he gets his enemies because he kind of I don't know. That might be
In this first book, the only real enemy he has is Ambrose, really.
and
Um,
him. Yeah,
that's kind I view that kind of extension of Ambrose, honestly,
yeah.
like in the
It's pretty
same
much the same.
vein.
How about so Quoth and Ari?
That is a really fun, beautiful thing to explore. I think it might be worth it just to kind of like expand on Rothfuss's writing of the book in general, because those sections of the book are the most. I don't want to use the word flowery, but they're definitely the most flowery of the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. All right, so let's have that one as our second one, Quoth and Ari. And then I'm thinking Quoth and Bast. Like, I think there's a lot of hypotheticals and a lot of speculation we can get in there.
Hmm.
Or maybe Quoth and his friends.
I think both in Abinthy would be worthwhile to
Oh yeah,
discuss.
Quoth and
That's
Abinthy. That's a good one.
that's a pretty fundamental like relationship for the story at all in
Yeah.
general.
Well, how about
Um,
just Quoth and his and that whole family like troop in general, like that whole. Um, or yeah, let's do Quoth and Abinthy. Let's do Quoth and Abinthy. Real quick, let's think of any other ones we might want to do. Um, Dang, he really doesn't like. There's his teachers. There like he Exladal and uh, what's his name in the fishery. But those are.
I mean,
I mean,
honestly, the actual people end up being a lot more important in the second book, like his
yeah,
actual like person to person stuff, you know, because that a lot of that book is more like because this whole book is about establishing Kvothe as a character, right?
hmm
The next book is all right. You have this character Kvothe. Now, how's he going to interact with the world? I think in my head is how I view the two like distinctions. Um, so the next one's more
Ooh,
important for characters.
two things from Kelsey in the chat. She says yes, enemies and the people that jumped him in Tarbine. Really, anyone that stands in his way.
That's
So
fantastic. Yeah.
those are that's we because we jump over Tarbine because we kind of want to get to the university. But yeah, he
It
did
also makes
take.
me sad just talking about it and thinking about it.
I
That's why I
know
wanted to. But it's
Tarbine,
important.
like the entire
Um,
3 years he spent in Tarbine, just in general, was oh god, it's
it's
hard.
rough to read, man.
It's
It's not
rough.
easy. Um,
Um, but I think yeah, I think Quoth and Denna,
okay.
Quoth and crap, Quoth and who did we say? Quoth and help me out. Quoth and
It's
Denna.
a Denna Ari Abinthy, and then
Yeah, so Denna Ari Abinthy. So let's go ahead and start with Denna.
all right. Give me one sec. I have to use the bathroom.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna go Abinthy, Ari, Denna. I think we should end with Denna. So let me go ahead and set the stage with Ari. To give you some more detail, Quoth meets her because he starts to practice his music up on the roof of Mains, which is essentially like the main building of the university. And he gets interrupted one night by this like super loud clanging, and he can't figure out what it is. And it ends up actually helping him a whole lot because he like makes a connection that helps him in his studies, and that kind of sidetracks us away from thinking about wait, what's this sound? And then a couple chapters later, boom, she pops back up, and it turns out that Quoth has established this like tenuous relationship with this super skittish girl who has kind of cracked. The studies at the university are really tough on the mind, and it kind of caused her to, yeah, it made her go a little cuckoo. And so she ran away and got scared and dived under the university. And Quoth is slowly forming this relationship where she listens to his music, they have dinner, and he brings her stuff every now and then, because she doesn't really strike you as someone that is homeless and needs help, because she doesn't act that way. but she's starving. She's malnourished, and the studies of the university just kind of cracked her. So we meet her as he's playing music, and it's a beautiful relationship. There's no doubt. Um, and I think Sydney, can you talk about some of that flowery language that you talked about that is really like an epitome of the Patrick Rothfuss writing style?
I mean, yeah, because like it sounds different than it did. But
You struggling with your audio? What's going on, Sydney? Sydney, can you hear me? What did you do, Sydney? What did you do?
I broke something, man.
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you. I hear you. Can you hear me? Nope, I cannot hear you now. I cannot hear you now.
what did I
Wait,
do?
there you are. I can hear you. I can hear you.
You can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hello?
Hello? I can hear you. Can you hear me? I'm going to just keep talking. Kelsey,
I can't hear you.
This is super exciting for you. What'd you do, my man? You literally just walked away.
I don't know what
Hold on, let me see. Wait, so can you hear me?
I can't hear you at all now.
Ooh, that's inconvenient. Here, let me disconnect from the call and then I'll hop back in. All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. That's so weird.
That is super weird. Okay, let me get. Dude, you just ruined the stream. It's over. Everyone left. There's no one in the chat, which is a super big difference than before. All three of the viewers, one of which is you, one of which is Kelsey. Welcome, Bibby Thumps. I think that's who's in the chat. It's so weird. I have like random users in the chat that I don't think are really there. If you're really here and like actually a viewer, please say something in the chat so I can welcome you with open arms because I love you and want you here. And I'm really appreciative that you came and spent your Saturday morning with us.
So that was super weird. I don't know why me disconnecting my headphones has anything to do with whether or not your audio comes through Discord for me. But because I turned them off and then my laptop also wouldn't play your sound. But Ari, the reason like I think Ari does a really good job of symbolizing Rothfuss's writing is that anytime there's any description of Ari, it's all about light and floating and like gravity isn't as important. And it's like, but it's not light as in like light of day. It's just light, which I think is an interesting distinction between what you usually expect for imagery, right? Because it's like almost like moonlight is a more apt description of the light imagery for Ari, because it isn't sunlight. That's for sure. She does not suggest sun ever. It's like if anything, it's the moon.
Yeah.
Because she comes outside when the moon's bright. When the moon's bright, but there's clouds, and it like I might be projecting some of the other stuff in that one standalone book about Ari onto this book in general, but
That's true.
because that one's so good. Oh.
Yeah, I never thought about how that character is super bright, but it's only in the darkness. You only meet her at night. You only meet her underground. Illumination. Kelsey uses the word.
That's a much better way to phrase it. Not light, but illumination, because it's all about her in the dark producing light, not just light existing by itself.
A glow, I think, like a good idea. Like not necessarily light, but glowing. Just like the little light that she carries to help her underground, that it has a glow. And just like the moon moonlight is more of a glow than a sunshine is. She kind of glows more than she is, like she produces light.
Mm-hmm. You know those, like the imagery in Avatar, the James Cameron one with the blue people?
Yeah.
All of the glowing stuff in that universe reminds me of Ari. Kind of like biological glow, almost fungal, but not, because Ari certainly isn't fungal at all in her imagery.
But I think there's a reason why Patrick Rothfuss, like her light source when she's underground, is a little rock that glows.
I think it's a mushroom, but
Whatever it is. And I don't feel bad about saying that because even though I've read Slow Regard of Silent Things, which like goes into more detail, it is technically mentioned in this book one time, very briefly,
for like a sentence. Yeah,
yeah,
literally.
which I definitely didn't notice the first time I read this book, and only noticed it after I read Slow Regard of Silent Things. But it's still in this book technically, so you should technically know about it. But yeah, I love, once again, there's an illustration, and I don't know if it's in this book or Slow Regard of Silent Things, but there's an illustration that I think is canon, and if it's not, I'm deciding it's canon right now. It's her, like, with her, like, her feet are off the ground, and her back is arched, and her hair is huge and wiry and all over the place, and she's backlit by the moon, like she's a silhouette, and it's a beautiful image, and it's what I think of every time I think of Ari. And she's this anomaly, you know. It's so, like, you can't even imagine, like, you can't even imagine that kind of character in another world. Like, it's very much this world of this crazy girl, this insane, literally insane, mentally ill girl, but she's beautiful and fun and bright, and Quoth even says you'd expect her to be skittish and shy and all this, but she's not. She's just crazy. She just prefers the company. She just prefers going underground. And I think, putting the speculation hat on, just gonna clock it right there. I think Ari tried to discover the names of things. I think because when Quoth calls down the name of the wind to strike Ambrose at the end of the book, his mind goes a little crazy. He describes it as a bird that can't find a landing in the storm.
Eladin, one of the masters that does like the magic, not just the sympathy. He goes on about, for a second there, he goes on about like, what I have to teach you can break your mind, you know? So I'm not going to teach a young kid. And that seems to be a pretty common thing to happen at the university, because they have this big, huge building for like 500 people who have gone crazy and insane. So I think it's a common side effect of messing around with the natures of the universe, I guess, is it breaks your head.
Yeah, Elodin even says, like, why do you think we have a insane asylum that has enough room for over half of the population of the university itself? It's because when you study the names of things, you can go insane. And one of the things that makes me even more convinced that Ari, like, studied the names of things was her names for rooms, because she names the things in the under things.
So good.
Yeah, like based on like vaults, which is what she like they all have very specific names. And
so I want to elaborate on her names there, by the way, because I think it's just so fantastic. So vaults is her name for this hallway that has a bunch of crevices that go across the hallway, right? And so the narrator Quoth, when he gets there, he doesn't understand why Ari calls it vaults, because it's not a grand hallway and there's not anything locked away or anything. But as Ari goes down the hallway, she does 3 leaps down the hallway to get down to the other side. And so she vaults down the hallway. And then Cricklet, right, is another name she has for a place. And there's a little trickle of water that comes down the wall and runs across the hallway, runs across the room, I guess. And that attracts a bunch of little crickets, like those ones you always find under houses and that kind of stuff. So Cricklet is good because it's like a little, I don't know, Cricklet, I don't know the exact word, that it reminds me of a small stream, like a trickle, something like that. Yeah, something like that. A trickle, right? But then crickets. So it's Cricklet, which I love so much. And then there's tons of things like that. And then Belows, yeah, Belows, which is billows, as in like, you know, the things you use to provide air to a forge. also billows isn't like a towel in the wind, and it's like, and it's also below, right? It's way below the ground. So it's like tons of things like that are just fantastic.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Um, and I think that's her attempt at, she can't find the true name of things, but she understands that everything has a name, and she searches for it. And once again, you find this out in Slow Regard of Silent Things, but I'm plugging in my knowledge of a different book in here. Sorry. You find out that she struggles. It's a kind of OCD where if anything is out of place with what its name is, like she can't find the name of something until it really arises. So she truly believes that these names are the name of these rooms. And you might, and like she doesn't try to control them with the name. Like she doesn't have that power in the same way that like if I know Sydney's name, I can say Sydney, and Sydney might look at me. And so that is a soft power that I have over Sydney, because using his name, I can control him. Because Elodin talks about that's what the power of someone who has a name does. If you can call someone's name, if you can call something's name, like you can call someone's name, you can control it the same way you can control someone that you call.
I
But
think
you have to have enough power to do that. You have to have enough authority to do that. Like if a police officer said, "Sydney, come here," Sydney's gonna get his ass over there because they're a cop or they're his dad. In the same way, you can call something's name, and if you have the power, you can then control it. Ari doesn't have the power to control things, but she seems to have the power to see things' names.
I think a good
Maybe.
way to consider it, Drake, is she's talking about the capital N name of things, right? Like it's
Yes.
capital N name, not lowercase n, capital N name. I
Capital
think that does
N,
it.
not
Yeah.
lowercase.
It's the name, not a name,
Yeah.
which is a good distinction to make.
And it's hard because we don't know whether they are the capital N name of things, or she's insane and she's wrong and like she's just
I
calling
think
things.
I think it's a little of both, because it's not, because if from my understanding of how like the whole system in the book works, right? It's not that you have it right, as in like there's an absolute correct answer. It's that your understanding of the name allows you to understand the complete nature of the thing you're referring to, right? Um, and so not everyone might have the same name for the wind, but everyone who can use the name of the wind does have a complete understanding of all of the facets that go into using that name. If that makes sense.
That's
I
it.
don't know if that's true. That's a pretty big speculation hat one.
Dude, put on you got to put it
But
on. You got to put on the speculation hat if you're going to speculate. Um
um, I do think I didn't think about this before we were talking about like relationships to talk about that quote in Ari is an important one, because I think Ari is a really good illustration for like the tenets of the magic quest she's trying to learn, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Not just in the relationship itself, because it is a good relationship, but it's a really good link between what he wants to know and the possibilities of knowing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
And also it represents the danger of the things that
mhm.
he's pursuing, because I mean
Which is really a common theme of this whole book, is that like I feel like in we talked about this previously in fantasy books a lot. There's like you have this one guy who's like, man, he's good at learning anything, right? Which is very true in this book. You definitely have that. But in most fantasy books, someone is like, okay, I'm gonna go learn this, and he's an apprentice for 6 months. Nothing too bad happens, and he learns it, right? And then he's a badass. In this series, this like Ko's learning this stuff, and he messes up, man, and like he spends 3 years living like an animal in a
yeah.
city, right, where like no one gives a shit about him. And then like there's tons of stuff in this like later on that goes poorly in this book, and then in the next book as well. There's a lot of, not to spoil anything, there's a lot of shit he messes up, and it sucks. Like when he messes up, it sucks. Like there's absolutely positive like negative results for him performing poorly or making a bad decision.
Yeah.
And
I
Ari does a good job of
I
highlighting
think
the danger.
I think we should come back to that because I'll want us to decide on like 3 themes. I don't know exactly. Themes
Okay.
are hard to pin down, but I definitely want to talk about the theme of like I almost want to call it cause and effect, or like that'll be that's what we'll talk about, is how we want to define the themes in order to talk about them. That'll be an interesting discussion in itself. Let's move on to Quoth and Abinthy. I think that's a good relationship to. It'll let us cover a lot. The relationship between the two of them is awesome. He's his first teacher, and we actually get the first example of Quoth kind of not really thinking through his actions and it leading to harsh consequences, which we'll talk about later when we cover themes. But Abinthy is this Arcanist that they kind of pick up on the road as their acting troupe when Quoth. This is the very beginning of Quoth's story. Very beginning. He's like 12. But he gets on the good side of Abinthy because Abinthy really likes his talent. And Abinthy kind of takes him on as an apprentice and teaches him chemistry and geography and a big one is rhetoric and logic, like debating. And teaches him doesn't just teach him things, but teaches him how to think, which is really important. And without Quoth really knowing it, Abinthy's prepping him for the university.
Mm-hmm. I actually opened this book right to the page of what happens to do that first consequences thing with Abinthy, which is funny. But.
Yeah, so go ahead. So really quick before we get into that, what Sidney's fixing to share with us is one of the first moments we get where Quoth is super smart, super clever, way beyond his time, but doesn't think things through. And it's associated with a skill that Abinthy taught him that is borderline magic, which we've touched on before in this stream, which is called sympathy. Now Abinthy has taught him sympathy which takes something they call the Alar, which is strength of will. And the strength of will, it's a riding crop belief. You believe it so much that it's as if it's the same kind of belief that you believe how hard a riding crop will hurt when it whips you across your ass.
But pointedly, it's about it's applying that belief to things like when I let go of this rock, it's going to float up instead of down, right? It's things that fundamentally will not happen, but being able to convince yourself on a fundamental level that they will happen, and that's how the world functions, right?
Or that the belief, a lot of what it comes in is the belief that this is the same as this. These are the same things. They're not, but if I can believe that they are, then I can connect them as if they were, and the thing I do to this will then cause this to do the same thing. And so that is Alar. And the closer these things resemble each other, the easier that is. So if I, instead of having this, I had this, so they're a little closer in size, they're the same color, they're both technology, then it'll be easier to, when I live this, for this to go with it. And that is sympathy. There's a whole lot more of thermodynamics and advanced sympathy, which we don't even get to know a whole lot about, but that is the basic premise that is super important to the series and leads Quoth into doing what Squid has right now, which is kind of dumb. He does a dumb thing. He's stupid.
So Quoth has been being taught sympathy by Abinthy, which is a fun phrasing. He's being taught and he's learning more and more about it, right? And he's riding along in the wagon with Ben, because remember, this isn't a traveling acting troupe, right? So they spend a lot of time traveling, and this is when he does a bunch of his learning. They ride along beside each other, and Abinthy just quizzes him and teaches him stuff. And so they're riding down the road, and there's this hawk way up in the air or whatever, right? And Abinthy goes to Quoth. He's like, Quoth, how would you bring that hawk down if you had to? And they go through some fun examples that show Quoth is very clever and, very atypical kind of stuff, back and forth about different uses of sympathy. And then eventually, Quoth says, I said casually, simply call the wind and make it strike the bird from the sky. And then you get this next little bit where Quoth is and then Ben says, well, how are you going to do that, man? And then Quoth says, I sensed he was going to finally tell me a big secret. He's as any 12-year-old dude a little kid being taught something does. Like finally, I get to learn some secrets. And like Drake said, does some dumb shit, and he's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do it. I'm not gonna answer his questions with words. I'm just gonna do it and let him watch me do it. And so he uses sympathy, which doesn't work, to try and bind the air in his lungs to the air outside to strike the hawk down to call the wind. Anyway, he ends up stopping himself from being able to breathe because once he does that, the air in his lungs is as heavy as the air outside, so he can't breathe and he starts suffocating. And then Ben has to save him, and it's very. I mean, Quoth ends up realizing he could die and that kind of stuff. And it effectively makes Ben realizes that this is a 12-year-old kid I'm trying to teach dangerous things to, which is the first real consequence because then Ben stops teaching Quoth more and more intense stuff.
It's a good example of like Quoth kind of thinking something through, like, oh, this makes sense if I can really believe that the air in my lungs, it's the same air that's out here, connect them, and then like it's him being clever, but he doesn't quite think it all the way through, and and we get introduced into this idea that Abinthy tells Quoth about. Okay, someone's stupid. Are they a threat? No. Okay, is someone with a sword a threat? No. Well, is someone stupid with a sword a threat? Yes. As you increase something, as you increase the scale of something, as you increase the global effect, decisions start to take on more weight. So what Quoth was dealing with here isn't that big of a deal, but it could have cost him his life. So he's dealing with forces that are bigger than he's prepared for, which I have a feeling as you scale up Quoth's abilities, then the danger that comes with Quoth's ability to make a decision starts to scale with it. Because the more that Quoth can do, the more damage he can inflict, the more wisdom he needs to have to make sure that he makes the right choice. But if he doesn't have the wisdom to go along with power, that's when things become dangerous. So this is him as a kid messing with things that he's not really prepared for, and you see that come up enough throughout his stories that I think because Quoth is telling this story for a reason, I think he includes those reasons so that you start to see this is the mistake I made. That I was messing with forces even bigger than ones that would kill my own life. And it was the same as when I didn't think things through when I was a kid, but it had drastically bigger consequences because I wasn't just messing with a sword. I was messing with a nuke. I was messing with a bomb. I was messing with countries. I was messing with kings. I was messing with societies. Like my decisions were able to make an impact on a global scale. And because it's the same lesson, but just getting scaled up as Quoth starts to learn and Quoth starts to the more he learns.
Mm-hmm. I think a good description of that is like when you go to take a test in school, and then you're like, okay, well I know all these answers in the test. So you just sit down, and you get to it, answering them all and everything. Except on the back page of the test, it's like if you want 100, skip all these questions, walk up to the desk and turn it in, right? All you have to do is read the whole test through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except you sit down and you're like, I know how to be clever and answer all these questions, so you just start answering them. I think that's a good descriptor of close things in general. He focuses so much on like the clever solution, he doesn't think what the effect of the solution might be.
He doesn't look at the big picture.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So do you want to move on to your favorite relationship?
Yeah, I think it's time. Quoth and Denna. Now, Denna is the girl he met on the road that then he meets again after like probably close to 6 months or a year at the university, and they start to grow closer and closer. The things we know about Denna, she's a bit of an unknown variable. She pops in like the wind. He treats her like a wild animal, like he's gonna scare her away, and their relationship is complicated to say the least. Like he obviously cares for her. we don't really know what her opinion on him is.
Dude, no, she obviously cares for him. Like even like just from like the stuff that happens in this book, like you kind of like she goes out of her way to spend time with him and everything. Like she's about it. Um, but I think there's a good explanation in the book here about how Denna is an orphan like Quoth, except she's not a guy, and so her options are very limited in how as far as how she can support herself. Um, and she supports herself by letting a lot of rich noblemen and everything court her and buy her stuff, and then she sells the stuff to fund her living and that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So I think that goes a long way to explaining the difficulties between the relationship. Is like just functionally for Denna to keep living, she has to remain aloof to a certain degree to
And
keep those.
when we learn about that from Diak, he says like don't blame, and so she gets these gifts from these rich suitors, and will you blame her if when she does she goes and sells them in order so that she can eat? Like it's and you start to see comparisons between, okay, well that's kind of what Quoth does when people buy him drinks at the bar. Instead of getting the drink or the gift that these people give him for playing music, he trades it in for money because he doesn't need the drink, he needs to eat. And you kind of see, well, Denna doesn't really have the option to be a musician as much as Quoth is. She doesn't have the option to go learn at the university. It's not as common. Like, she didn't have the options that Quoth did. So can you really blame her for doing the only thing that she knew how? And you also learn about that more in the second book. Denna has a really great point that she makes to like another girl that Quoth kind of listens in on, and is a really great description of like Denna's lifestyle and the way she ends up in. But we get this conversation between Diak, and you get a little bit of that. But every time Denna and Quoth are together, they have beautiful moments.
They have a hoot. I think they just have a hoot.
Yeah. So we talk about this, and I love that. I love their relationship. I think they are so good for each other. So all I can do is say, Sidney, why don't you like Denna? Why aren't you on board?
I love Denna as like, like a plot point and like from like the writing. I love her from that point of view, but as far as like what she does to not what she does to Growth, because she doesn't do anything on purpose to Growth at all. And this is like literally just from like me honestly like projecting a friendship onto the narrator. It's like I wouldn't want a friend of mine being all about romantically Denna, if that makes sense. And so I think that's why I don't like Denna, because like it just makes me untrustworthy, I guess. Of like, I feel like all of her plot points kind of take Quoth down a rabbit hole, and always like he has his plans, he's rumble along, and all of a sudden it's like, and it like just takes him off the road, I guess, if that makes sense.
I mean, but isn't that kind of a good thing? Like, what he struggles with
for the book, it is. I agree, absolutely, it is a good thing for the book.
But think about well, I'm just mean like no, I mean for Quoth, like when the masters asked him like, why are you coming to the university? Why do you want to learn these things? He doesn't really have an answer. Besides revenge, which he knows is childish. So, actually, now I just thought of this. I think there's going to become a decision point for Quoth of, does he learn all these things and does he protect Denna and choose Denna and a life with her? Or does he choose opposing the Chandran? And I think we all know what he probably ends up choosing because of where he ends up. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously wasn't the right choice.
That's a fair point.
But I can see what you mean. Like Diak and the other people at the pub like often tell to him like, be careful with what you're messing with. You're messing with fire. You're messing with the she runs.
I think Diak's description of Denna's nature is very good when he's talking about like different women are different sources of heat. Like some are like hearth fires that you keep you warm all night. Keep going forever and that kind of stuff. Some are like candle flames. some are like bonfires, and then Dinah is like someone sharpening a sword and against a grinding stone, and Dinah is like the fountain of sparks coming out, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's just dependent on literally whether or not the sword is touching the grinding stone. Um,
But by the way, people in the chat, please throw your opinions about Quoth and Dinah. I really want to hear. I really want to see how people come down upon the relationship because I can't. I'm blown away by Sydney's opinion on this, and I want to know if other people share it because I've always thought everyone was just Camp Dinah. I just thought we were all just waiting for them to work out, and it turns out we're not. We're not all in this together.
not all doing it now. No, I would love for that to be resolved, but I would love for it to be resolved in a fashion that did not end up with Quoth, with Dinah in her current form, if that makes sense. But life's a progression, so maybe Dinah eventually gets to the point where it's correct for them to be together. But like imagine if this book went right in a fashion where Quoth and Dinah start more of an actual substantiated relationship while he's at the university, right? Like, what? How does that work functionally in your head? Like,
By the way, Kelsey wants them to be together. I just want to say she's on my side. I get what you're saying. She's the distraction. She's a he can't control himself around her.
I think for this book and for the next book, they are too young. Not too young. Too young's the wrong word. Too passionate, maybe. Passionate isn't quite the right word.
Well, but I think I kind of get what you're saying, and doesn't that just mean that they're not either in the position to have anything but the relationship that they have right now? She, because she needs someone to support her, she needs a way to survive, and he, because he needs to kill the Chandran, save the world, revenge against his and he has all this stuff that he needs to learn at the university. But when they come together, there's sparks, fire imagery.
Yeah.
Like Kelsey's talking about. Kelsey says, I agree with that though. They should end up together, just not yet. And she made a really good point about the people that fire imagery is often related to are Dinah and Quoth. When we talked about when he was auditioning, he was a fire that people like leaned in towards, that he wanted to burn, and he burned in the Aeolian or whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm. I do think that's a good point you just made about like them being good for each other also in the moment. Because Dinah, certainly towards the end of this book, you realize that she needs, like in that section after they get back from doing their adventure, whatever, you realize that Quoth is a very important emotional support for her, because what she does to live is a very emotionally draining thing, right? Just go through relationships like that. And then I think that it's important that Quoth have on occasion distraction from his pursuits, if that makes sense. Because without Dinah, I think he works himself into the same state he did previously in the book before he like kind of started managing his work better. With Dinah there too much, I think he doesn't spend enough time pursuing his stuff. But with Dinah there in the amount she is, I think it does end up being a positive thing for both of them. So I get it. It's just like something about the relationship just kind of like rubs me the wrong way. I don't know what it is, but
I love that it does, because it's made me kind of look at the relationship more. Yeah, like a lot more, because I kind of look at it and I think their relationship is perfect where it is right now for who they are right now. I would like it to grow as they grow and get to a point where, well, I don't know. The relationships in this book are just so unique. Like the relationship he has with Fela or whatever it is, the relationship he has with Ari, the relationship he has with Denna, the relationship he has, just like the way like women just flock to him. His relationships with women in this book are just like run the gambit, and it's so cool to me. Like all the relationships he has with women are really interesting.
They're very atypical from what you'd expect reading a book, Usually you expect them to be kind of linear and not particularly dynamic, you know. But this
Mhm.
relationship with Denna is like so, like throughout the book, you know, like how much it changes and just with different plot points and everything. It's not a usual thing to read at all.
Yeah, cause okay, and I think they're good. Like one, well, well, here's a question: do you want Quoth to end up with anyone at all? Like, do you think he'd be better off? I mean, as an innkeeper, maybe. You know,
I hate to say it. Like it feels like I'm committing some kind of treason to my soul by saying it. But I think it's better if Quoth dies without dies alone, man. I don't know.
dies
Like
alone. Oh,
I hate saying it, but I think it's just like I hate to say it, but it doesn't work in my head for him to be with anyone.
okay. Well, do you want that for Quoth or do you want that for you?
Dude,
Like, do you
I don't
think?
want that for me at all. Jesus Christ. I exist in relationships. I would not be able to
Oh no 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 no
stomach
no
that.
no no no! I don't mean like.
No.
Do you
Oh, you
want
mean
to die alone?
my enjoyment of the book? Um,
Yeah, I mean, if Quoth, because you said, would you want your friend to be romantically involved with Dinah? Would you, if Quoth was your friend, his personality as a person, you knew him as a friend, would you think that he would be happier alone or with someone?
I kind of think Kvothe would be happier alone.
And more as like the adventure
Yeah.
type, his time being better spent going off on adventures and doing stuff like that, like
As far as
going to
his
chase down Dracus, says I.
and this is me like extrapolating his character from the current stuff in this book at this point in this book, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically at his emotional point of the of him telling the story in this book right here. Um, at the end, like if there's a way for him to be fulfilled just by satisfying like you know whatever is currently causing all this problem, I think it works out better for him to not be with someone. But you know, I don't know.
But who, at this point in the story, at this point in the story,
It's a
who
big.
is the one person that has been with him and been a huge advantage when he was out there in the field doing his whole adventuring thing, his investigation, his all that.
I mean, clearly, yeah. I mean, like,
Clearly dinner.
absolutely.
And I say that because I agree that he should be alone if he couldn't find someone that fostered his fire the way he needs it. If he can't find someone who makes him feel like the Aeolian does, who makes him it doesn't make him feel like they're a place to burn, that they don't fuel his fire and give him more to burn. But I think Dinah, as long as Dinah's like, yeah, let's go freaking chase blue fire, let's do it, and she seemed on board with it. But you're we don't know a whole lot about her personality a lot yet. Even by the second book, we don't know if maybe it's just that she was in that right place at that right time, or if she would really be like, yeah, I'm an adventurer just like you. She strikes me as a person that's on the road and is that kind of way, but maybe she just wants to settle down. And if she's the type that just wants to settle down and not do anything, nah, fuck that. Fuck that for Quoth. Like, yeah, fine. Like, and maybe that's me pushing my own stuff. I'm like, no, if I would want to find someone that like is like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's go hiking. Fuck yeah, let's go find a Dracus. Let's go find blue fire. Let's go like that's me. And I feel like Quoth is there right there with me for that. But tell me, what do you think would be best for Quoth? And what do you think? And I mean being alone, or with a person like Fella, or with a person like Ari, or a person like, or just chasing random tail like the redhead in the second book that we're not going to talk about because it's in the second book, but we both know that it happens. Or like the girl that like came up to him. Like, what kind of relationships with women do you think would be best for Quoth? And what type of relationships with women do you think would be best for you to enjoy the story that is being told for Quoth? Like,
I mean, honestly, for me to enjoy the story, I think it's Dinah. I mean, that's just it. Like, I think for me enjoying the story, it is Dinah. Because you need, for the story to be fun to read, you need a recurring character right? You don't need new characters. You need a recurring character that's interesting that you want to know more about, right? But you need it to recur at a frequency that like you don't know when it's going to happen next. You know what I mean? He goes out and does some stuff, and then on occasion runs into her, right? So that makes a good story. As far as like for Kavoth's sake, I think a more consistent dinner.
A more consistent dinner.
Yeah, more of a constant, more of a constant companion as opposed to a intermittent companion.
Yeah, do you have the chat up? Can you see what Kelsey wrote?
Let me see.
Because she's talking about how his story parallels Lanre's story, and I definitely think that's true. I think there's huge parallels between him and
Oh
Lanre.
man, that is a fantastic point. What if the reason he ends up doing all this shit that ends up leading him to the current state of affairs is because he loses dinner, right?
Oh,
And he just fucks shit up.
fuck!
That is a fantastic point. Oh man.
Oh no. Do you think he could talk about her the way he does if she's dead?
Think about what Lanre would be talking about if you asked him about like what was her name?
I can't
Lyra?
remember.
Yeah, it was Lyra. It was Lyra. Lyra. Lyra, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I mean, like, clearly, I think Lanre would have the same feelings about Lyra that Kvothe has about Dinah. I'm getting a little echo from you, by the way, as well. I don't know if that's going through to stream or not, but
Thank you. Here. I'm just gonna put on my headphones to make sure that it doesn't happen. Even though it covers up my beautiful hair.
you gotta just not watch it for a couple of days, and then it kind of looks right when you put it on the headphones.
Dude, nah, I started using like actual product and shit, like a plebeian.
Oh, bro. You just gotta use grease in your
Hard
hair.
or something. I can't hear you right now, just so you know. I unplugged my thing. So you can go ahead and shit talk me all you want.
Oh, I think Drake should
Kelsey
use
to
grease
tell
in
me
his
what you
hair.
say,
I think if you guys agree, let him know.
What'd you say?
What?
What?
Nothing.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So, Kelsey, you think Dinah died?
Oh, she straight up thinks she. Yo, put the speculation hat on Kelsey. Put the speculation hat on Kelsey. Oh man.
So, I almost think it's more effective as far as Kvothe wrecking shit. Not that Dinah dies, as in Dinah resolutely and convincingly chooses someone over him.
Or chooses a different lifestyle. Like she. But in what world would that happen? Like.
Or, oh shit, Kelsey, that's a fantastic point. What if Kvothe does some dumb shit, gets Dinah killed, and then starts this whole nonsense?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't think through the consequences.
Yeah, so. But do you think he could talk about Dinah this casually? Like.
If she was dead, or
if she was
what do you
dead
mean?
and he caused it.
I don't think he could, no.
No, like, because you got to remember the way this story is set up is that he's telling the story. And I don't think he could tell this story if that is how it ended.
I think he could tell the story if he was conveying it to Chronicler 40 years after this stuff had happened.
But
right?
I think this is recent, right?
You get the vibe that it's happened like within like 5 years, right? And he hasn't been doing the end stuff for longer than like 5 years, I'd say. That's a pretty arbitrary number in my head, but I don't think it's been longer than 5 years.
Okay, because Kelsey's saying that it's not casual, that he struggles too much to talk about her in the right way, but he struggles to talk about her in the right way in the way that you struggle to talk about someone you're in love with. The way you try to tell your friends, like, she's beautiful, she's like, he struggles to find.
But do you think? I think Kvothe would be dramatic enough to still be in love with Dinah even if she wasn't around, like if she was dead.
Yeah, but would he talk about her the way that he does? Okay, well, this is going to come down to I don't think she is. I think she's alive. I think something happened.
We can actually find out. We can go to that chapter where Bass is talking about seeing her, and just look at the phrasing of the
present, whether it's present tense or past tense or
yeah.
how they talk. Yeah, and Bast would know if she was dead, and that'd be pretty irreverent to talk of the dead that way. There's no solemnness in the way. That's what I mean. There's no solemnness to the way Kvothe speaks about her. There's nostalgia of something lost, but not dead.
Mhm.
So, in my opinion, so Kelsey thinks she's dead. I'm putting my I'm taking it back. I'm taking the speculation hat back. I'm putting it on my head. I speculate. I think that something happened. That's my speculation. Something happened. Let's wrap it up. Put it in a bow. No, I think. Honestly, I think Quoth has serious mental health issues with insecurity, and he did something that he believes Denna can never forgive, and so has chosen to isolate himself from Denna because he believes that he made a mistake so harsh that Denna could never forgive him, and that's why he's separated himself from Denna and isolated himself, in addition to the fact that he's just had to go into isolation because of what he did to the whole political system, world, king killing, whatever, that he figgity fucked up in general. And I will admit, I will admit that this opinion comes from a hope that they do somehow end up back together, because in this scenario that I've created, there's a way that she comes back into the story and she forgives him, and that kind of bridges this gap that he's created. So I mean, my little creation may be a little biased on what I want to happen, but like, doesn't that kind of more fit the vibe of the way he talks about her?
I, I think it does match the vibe of what like his discussion in general, because his discussion is something is lost and unreturnable and unfixable
Mm.
from his phrasing. But all right, so it's kind of weird, this whole book, because you have Quoth narrating Quoth's story, right? But then you have Rothfuss's phrasing around Quoth's narration, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Quoth's narration around Denna is something's irrevocably lost, right? Irrevocably lost, but present tense, I think, if that makes sense. So not past tense, as in this has been lost. This is lost, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but Rothfuss's narration of Quoth's narration is fixable, like just like his general phrasing.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and of course, you literally have to write a fucking essay going through this book of like picking out individual words and like arranging that. So I have no real substantiation, but
Quoth's narration is um crap. What's the word I'm looking for? Is certain about the law, like is certainty on the like lostness of his relationship with Denna, but Patrick Rothfuss's framing of the relationship
oh,
is one.
Kelsey went and looked at the phrasing.
Oh no! You crap! You gotta be kidding me!
Do you know what
No.
page I was on, Kelsey? I'm really
Yeah,
curious. I
Kelsey,
want
hit
to
us
go
with
look
that
at it.
page or that chapter so we can go look it up too.
Yeah.
I like how we look. Is like, oh god, she did.
Yeah, I think you saw from my face that you needed to look
I
at
did. I did. I was like, oh no, I don't want to look at the chat.
She did.
She did. All right, now we all go look at our books. We all go get out our books.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
by
might
the
as well find
way,
it.
Kelsey, were you here for my starting screen? Did you see the starting soon?
I saw it with the Kindle.
Yeah. Did you saw? Oh, you saw it.
Yes.
Yeah. What'd you think, man? I made that.
Oh, I thought it looked fantastic. I didn't even consider that you made it. I
Yeah.
probably should have. It was your Kindle
Yeah. It's a
cover.
picture of my. Oh,
Yeah.
here, I'll pop it up right now. Hey, it's page 418. But yeah, I thought it was well done. I quickly took the picture, and I want to make like a sort of animation style or something to go with it. But I kind of think it's cool, like a Kindle kind of like, I think I like it. I like it.
Chapter 57.
All right, hold on. Chapter 57, page 418. All right, I've got the. How do I? Thank you, Patrick Rothfuss. Have you found it yet?
Nope, chapter 59 now, but I'm cheating and using a book.
You're using the book. Oh,
Mhm.
let's see which is faster.
I found it.
Damn it. Page.
So I think, all right, she had a crooked nose, Reshi.
Is that what you're talking about?
I'm just looking at the phrasing here.
Yeah, is that
Yeah.
what, hold on, Kelsey. Is that what she had a broken? No. That's past tense, like you'd say, like when you saw someone, like they had a red shirt on, or yeah, they had a black, like they had bad hair, or they had red hair. You'd say that in the past tense. Okay, my pages are obviously not the same as her pages.
Her eyes were dark. They were set in an oval face. Her smile could. Her lips were red.
He says my trouble bast is that she is very important to the story. I cannot think of how to describe her.
Dude, it's almost like fucking Rothfuss was being careful here with the verbiage he used. Because, like, it's not. Because you can say she is important to the story and refer to her as an idea instead of a living person.
God, the trouble is. Okay, hold on. Quoth said, amused. He paused for a moment, and when he spoke it again, it was slowly. His eyes were far away. The trouble is, she is unlike anyone I have ever known. Ah, shit. Literally the next something. There was something intangible about her, something compelling, like heat from a fire. Different thing, but still fire imagery. She had a grace, a spark.
Drake, in this section, in this paragraph here that starts with, "I understand Bass, but then again, I've met her." Both looked at Chronicler. The trouble comes from comparison. Blah 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 blah. She was unlike anyone I have ever met.
I don't know.
Finally, say that she was beautiful. I don't know, man. If Kavut's all about this woman, I think if she's around still, she says, "Finally, say that she is beautiful." Dude, I hate to say it, but I think Kelsey's right.
No,
I think
I can't. I think that's because he's describing she was beautiful, as in past tense of the story he's about to
important
tell.
to the story. Yeah. So it is hard to decipher through this because it is told from that lens, right? But
In the same way that he says, like, her lips were red, her lips were always red, morning and night. He's describing something in the past.
But then you have here where he says, "My trouble, Bass," like you said, "My trouble, Bass, is that she is very important to the story." Like,
she is very important, very important.
that's it. I mean, I think it's a 50-50 shot from this. Like Kelsey said, Rafa searches his words very carefully.
Yeah, he does choose his words very carefully. Oh my god, if she's dead, I'm gonna be so sad.
I wouldn't be.
Okay, I don't believe he wouldn't try to be with her if but he's isolated himself. No, because he's insecure.
Kelsey, I would say that no, he's dramatic enough. He's dramatic enough for sure that even if she is alive, he would be like, "Well, I don't think I deserve to be with her, so I'm gonna go live in an inn."
He's literally isolated himself from the world that he was a hero in, and he absolutely wouldn't try to be with her if she was alive, because he would convince himself in his head that he's not worthy, because he's depressed, he's insecure, he has all of these issues. He would make it in his mind that she didn't want to be with him.
But all right, so looking at this chapter, I think there's a legitimate 50-50 shot she's dead. I thought she was alive. Reading this chapter here, 50-50 shot she's dead, bud.
Oh, if she's dead, I'm gonna be so sad.
You can't deny it. This chapter, the lack of explicit proof.
You Kelsey for saying I would cry, but I think it'd be satisfying to the story if she did die. That's messed up.
If that isn't a perfect description of Dinah's character, I agree with that very much.
That's messed up, the two of you. I care about these characters for themselves as a character, not just how much they satisfy me as a reader.
You're too empathetic, Drake. Or empathetic. But it's 50-50, man. There's no in this chapter here, there is no proof that she's alive still. They're describing her, they're talking about her in the present and like the current frame of the story.
They're talking in the present about meeting her in the past. And so it's confusing about whether their adjectives and their verbs mean.
But the part about it being confusing at all, right, means Rothfuss doesn't want us to know she's alive or not, right?
I think there's a possibility she's dead. But I also think there's a possibility she's alive, because I don't think the argument that if she was alive, he would go find her holds water. Because I think there are many situations.
I agree with that, because if he did some shit to like almost kill her or something for being stupid, he'd be like, okay, well, I don't deserve to be with her.
And I think if he convinces himself that she doesn't want to be with him, he's the kind of person that would keep himself away from her because he believes it's what she wants. Whether it is, and especially if it is what she wants. But even if it isn't what she wants and he's convinced himself that it is, he's the kind of person that would keep himself away from her just because he thinks that it's what she wants.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But this isn't the first time we've met Dinah. This is the first time we're meeting her in this way. Oh, because this description is when he meets her after she's sung, not the first. Oh, crap. Do we have any? Does it do an interlude when he meets her for the first time? Is there any interlude about when? Oh God, we gotta move on, dude. We're at an hour and a half. We're at an hour and a half, and we haven't even talked about themes. I love talking about characters. I think talking about the relationships has actually made us talk about the plot in a better way.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. It's like and I knew that would happen, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to. Okay.
If you're doing a whole book, especially books that are plot, it's hard to do them short.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So next, I was thinking we'd either say our favorite quote, or we could go straight into themes.
I'm down with favorite quote.
Yeah, but I think maybe ending on favorite quote might be better. Because honestly, it'll give us a point where we need to stop talking. It'll kind of be like, okay. And then quotes are a very easy end.
I agree.
Yeah, and it also, if you haven't actually chosen a favorite quote, it'll give you time, those of you in the chat, to frantically go and find one of your favorite quotes.
I know mine already.
Yeah, so. I know mine too, and I'm cheating because mine's like a fucking paragraph, but it technically is just one quote. I swear.
Oh man, I have to pick between favorite. Like, I have two.
Favorite. No, I'll give you two. I'll give you two. I gotta go use the restroom though. So you talk with Kelsey about possible themes in ways that we can confine themes to talk about like 2 or 3 of them. I think consequences of actions. I think rashness, not thinking things through. Like we need to find a way to talk about that theme. Maybe talking about fire imagery, or like you figure this out while I go to the bathroom. I'm so frustrated about the fact that Dinah might be dead. You figure the next part out with Kelsey, you freaking savages, talking about freaking the way characters should die just to make you feel more satisfied about the story, whereas they might just killing them off. I'm frustrated.
I agree with you, Kelsey, about picking 2. There's no way you can just pick one. Like they're too good. They're way too good. Man, themes though, that's hard to do. The consequences one is a pretty consistent theme. I was gonna say sacrifices, but that's kind of part of consequences. There's the warmth and light imagery. Oh, that's good. Nature imagery. That's I like that a lot. There's what is nature imagery like related to in the book? It's always I feel like important things are always shrouded in that kind of imagery. Like, oh, that's a really good point. Because important things really are always shrouded in that imagery. And Kavo spends a lot of time going about nature imagery with Denna. Like he has that whole conversation about what flower she would be, which is a pretty good one to cover in that topic. Nature imagery is a really good one.
Yeah, but you probably hope the Chandra.
It is always the people. It is. That's fantastic.
Plunge their heart into Dennis' chest and just rip it out. That's what you probably hope, Patrick. Just like because you like the imagery. And I bet you hope they throw her heart into a fire because it lines up with the other fire imagery that you like.
Are you saying the nature imagery in Legend of Music, Kelsey? It's another friggin' theme, man. Hmm.
While we're at it, why don't we just kill Willem and Simon and everybody else that he likes and everyone else that he loves and Diak and Count Thrape and all the people that are his friends at the university.
Dan, were you ranting still while you were in the kitchen, Drake? Sounds like you were.
Say again?
Sounds like you were ranting even when you were in the kitchen, just a constant like Yosemite Sam kind of.
It was in my head for sure. All right. What do we got? Okay, so Kelsey wants us to end on quote. I don't know though. I feel like he has such a draw to her. He would say just close enough by to protect her. Frick, that's a good point. She's taking 2 nature imagery, moon, wind, fire. So let's put imagery in with just talking about the way Rothfuss writes, because we've talked about that a lot about how Rothfuss's writing style is really important. So let's just kind of put imagery in with talking about the way Rothfuss structures his world and his writing style.
Mm-hmm.
His parents died. His whole troop died.
What is?
So, yeah, let's talk about the theme of the consequences for actions and kind of the significance of that towards the greater story. Let's talk about imagery and writing style. And let's talk about how y'all have broken black hearts because you want people to die.
It's hard for me to come up with like another theme. It's not easy.
I mean, we are making them very general. Let's talk about learning, how the importance of because the whole story is structured around him learning, and everything's a learning experience. That he talks about learning all the time.
I mean, yeah, but that's just the plot of the book.
Yeah, that's just the plot of the book.
I don't know if you can make that a theme. He goes to school. I mean, like
he
this
goes
whole
to
thing
school. That's the thing.
He wants to learn more about the Chandrian,
Let's talk about the parallels between the origin stories of Lan. Let's talk. Oh, storytelling. Let's talk about the theme of storytelling. Like how it like is a huge part of this story is storytelling in itself. We'll talk about the origin stories and how they parallel his story. We'll talk about how him as a narrator is threaded through and becomes a like how that structures it in a way. Yeah, let's talk about storytelling itself as a theme.
I like that.
All right, cool. Let's hop on to consequence. Let's end. Actually, let's end on the consequences of his actions because I feel like we've talked about that one a lot, and I really love. I think that's super significant and super important. So let's end on that one. Let's begin
Okay.
with imagery and Patrick Rothfuss's writing style, the flowery nature of it, so to speak, and how it.
Speaking of its flowery nature, I think uh, like any writer, of course, anything that's written, the imagery is associated around is grouped down the important aspects of the story per the writer's opinion, right? Um, and there is certainly quite a bit of imagery around the characters, like Kelsey said in the chat earlier.
Mhm.
And specifically talk about flowery imagery, if that section that outing where Kvothe talks to Denna about what flower she would be, that is chock full.
Oh God! Sorry. Go ahead.
That is just chock. I mean, like you sound like you were gonna say something. You liked it a lot, but I don't even know what chapter that's in.
So I think we have a real additional viewer. I'm not super positive, but if clear your browser history is an actual viewer and not one of these other like bot things that are popping up in my chat all the time, welcome. And please say hey in chat so I know that you are real, and follow if you like talking about books. But back to the amazing part of the book that Sydney just brought up. Yeah, that's so beautiful. The way everyone speaks in this novel is like really poetic, especially Quoth. And the way Quoth chooses to answer Denna's the way Quoth chooses to answer Denna's question about, oh, well, what flower would I be? Of course, he can't just be like, oh, you're a daisy. You're a dandelion because you are pretty. No, he makes it this beautiful. He like buys himself time to actually think about it by going off on this poetic spree of a description of how she is and is not other flowers. And brilliant, by the way, definitely stealing that. Of course, as like we read fictional things where authors have taken hours to come up with stuff, so we can go, okay, I'm stealing that for my everyday life, and just yeah. Do you have that paragraph? Do you have that part? Are you looking for it?
Yeah, I just found it.
Go ahead and read us some of it.
He says when he picks what flower she actually is. So first of all, I can think it's kind of important actually. He goes through several other flowers, right? And he's like the typical ones you'd expect, and then he gets to some atypicals. Um, but well, very well. Let me think. I turned to her. I turned to look at her, and then away. Let's run down the list. Dandelion might be good. It is bright, and there is a brightness about you. But dandelion is common, and you are not a common creature. Roses we have dealt with and discarded. Nightshade, no. Nettle, perhaps. You are correct, except for your tongue. It doesn't suit you. And so much good stuff. Wild oat, I exclaimed, startling a laugh from her. Its wildness suits you, but it is small flower and bashful. For that, as well as other, I cleared my throat. More obvious reasons, I think we'll pass the wild oat by. Daisy is a good one, tall and slender, willing to grow by roadsides. A hardy flower, not too delicate. Daisy is self-reliant. I think it might suit you. Let us continue. This isn't too much imagery here, but then he gets to the one he does pick for her, and there is some imagery here.
Well, and
He
it's
picks it.
I'd like, before you get into that, I'd like to point out that this is just important because it shows that both in the way Quoth is talking, it shows both something that's important in real life and what Quoth shows through the way that his story is written. It doesn't always matter as much what you write, or what you say, but how you say it. Eventually, what you say matters, but making the journey more interesting, getting there in an interesting way, always makes things better. Don't just say I love you. Don't just say you're pretty. Find a way. The more unique of a way you take that journey to telling someone something, the more interesting it is and the more unique it is to you, because everyone can say the 3 words "I love you." Everyone can say that someone is pretty. But if you filter those words through your brain and find ways of making it unique for the way you say it, it's just a mathematical thing of the more unique way you say of something, the less chance that it is anything that has been said before.
I mean,
Just
the functional purpose of those kind of conversations, right, is to form a personal connection. So the more personal your words are, the more able they are to form that connection, right? So it just makes sense that you should make them your words. You shouldn't just arbitrarily be like, I've heard these words before and I like them and people responded well to them. Make them yours, Pick
yeah.
out stuff that identifies yourself as a person. Make them
Yeah,
personal.
so bring us into the way that Patrick Rothfuss allows Quoth to create a fitting metaphor and uses his words to create a more interesting way to compliment this girl because he's a player.
So eventually he goes on a long list I was just talking about, back and forth, which is really, by the way, fantastic, like, action, because he talks about all the positive benefits of Denna and why they don't align with these flowers, which is mechanism wise perfect. And then he gets down, he says he stopped walking, Celis flower or Salus flower, I don't know how to pronounce it quite. Um, she stopped and turned to look at me. All this and you pick a flower I don't know. What is a Celis flower? Why? Igfo says, it is a deep red flower that grows on a strong vine. Its leaves are dark and delicate. They grow best in shadowy places, but the flower itself finds stray sunbeams to bloom in. I looked at her. That suits you. There is much of you that is both shadow and light. It grows in deep forest, and it is rare because only skilled folk can tend one without harming it. It has a wondrous smell and is much sought and seldom found. I paused and made a point of examining her. Yes, since I am forced to pick, I would choose Celis. Like, talk about like just not only is that a fantastic like thing to say to someone, I think it's also a very apt description of Denna, right?
And
So it's like,
it both shows that Quoth knows her quite well and also kind of gives the audience it lets us learn a lot about Denna because we're like, yeah, I think that's actually pretty accurate.
mm-hmm. And then towards the end of this, I think it's just worth saying because it's so fantastic. And then Koa says like, well, what of me? What flower am I? And then Dennis says the willow blossom, um, without a moment's hesitation. And then he says, the willows have blossomed. And she looked and said, I don't think so. And he says, a rare treat to be given one then. Why a willow blossom? You remind me of a willow, strong, deep-rooted, and hidden. You move easily when the storms come, but never farther than you wish. And then he says, cease these sweet words. You seek to bend me to your will, and it will not work. Your flattery is not to me but wind. She watched me for a moment as if to make sure my tirade was complete. Beyond all other trees, she said with a curl of smile on her elegant mouth, the willow moves to the wind's desire. Oh man, talk about like this section of imagery here, like evoking the exact nature of Kavoth and Dinah's relationship. You have this thing where he talks about like, Dinah is hard to cultivate. She's hard to manage. She's hard to support, that kind of stuff. But she's the kind of thing that grows in shadow and shines in light, right? Which is such an apt description of Dinah. And you get down here and you have a tree that is Kavoth here, where it's very malleable to the wind, right? But the wind will not break it, and the wind being Dinah. And I mean, like the wind being Dinah also just does a really good job of summing up her like kind of capricious nature. And then you have her being able to influence Kavoth. And like this whole section of imagery is just like, here's Kavoth, here's Dinah, here's relationship. And that you don't need it any more than this to sum up their relationship.
And proof that Rothfuss is a genius. Think about that further in the grander scheme of the story of if the wind is Dinah bending Quoth to his like that interchange between her and Quoth. Quoth is always chasing the name of the wind, which is an understanding of the wind, which is
shit.
something always ever changing, which he can never truly quite understand. And adequately relating Dinah and the wind and that chasing of understanding.
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic point. Yeah, he's always chasing the name of the wind. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of the way that Rothfuss uses imagery throughout. Like that's why teachers tell you to use imagery, boys and girls, is because it makes some, you don't always just want to hear something is something. You want to hear it in a way that makes you just stop and remember it.
The way the imagery works here in this specific example and throughout this book is not to describe the characters that it's used to relate to, right? It is to tell you what those characters are, right? There's a distinction there between using imagery to saying she was like this, right? Or but like all this imagery in this book is this character, right? Like this example here, this tells you, like I said, like a little second ago, like this tells you functionally everything you need to know about Dinah and Chloe's relationship through imagery. It's not a description; it's what their relationship is, and like I think that goes through the whole book of taking it a step further than using imagery to let the reader know a description.
Yeah. It effective yeah. It just it effectively brings in a lot of it lets you know more about the story than just what it's telling you. I don't know. Like let's move so some of the imagery that we also like to talk about is a lot of the fire imagery. I think that's something that's very important to keep an eye on is fire, nature, wind. Like all of those things are often brought up and often connected to very important people and things throughout the book. Like the way that he burns in the Aeolian, the way she's described as fire.
I have a quote
Yeah.
about that imagery specifically, not my quote. Jeez.
Jeez.
One sec. Stay here. I think the best thing about the Kindle version is that you can search stuff,
Yeah.
and it makes it really easy to navigate for this stuff. How do I get to my notes?
Sponsored by Amazon Kindle.
Let me show you my ad version. Come on.
After this, we're gonna hop on. We're gonna hop into our next thematic discussion of not consequences of actions. Oh, the role of storytelling and in the Name of the Wind.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
for sure. Where the hell? I
Come on,
emailed
man.
this.
We're gonna lose our 2 viewers. I'm sorry. Clear your browser history. I wish Sidney had his stuff together.
I don't. All right.
Or maybe it's lemon juices.
So this is when he is sitting there watching the wind in the courtyard, right? He's standing on the roof. It's nighttime, right? He's looking out there watching the wind. It's swirling, moving all these leaves, right? And this kind of relates to talking about Chloe's general search for knowledge, but through wind imagery, right? And it only looked chaotic because it was vastly, marvelously complex. What's more, it always seemed to be changing. It was a pattern made of changing patterns. It was, and then he gets interrupted. Anyway, so that sentence there. I don't know. It's such a good job of evoking what wind is, just like describing just the nature imagery, and then like just his search for knowledge throughout the whole book. It ties the wind to a search for knowledge, which the name of the wind.
And that things seem random and out of our control and completely ununderstandable until you are able to understand the complexity of it. Like things can be so complex that it feels like, oh, it's impossible, but really it's just so complex that you can't see the pattern because it's an ever-changing pattern or because the pattern is so complex. It really, he started to see, oh, no, there is a pattern here. I just can't quite make sense. And then he gets interrupted.
And then he gets distracted. Yeah. And that's eventually why he gets the name of the wind. But
yeah. Next, I love the idea of diving deep into the role that storytelling plays in Name of the Wind. Both it's a story within a story. There are stories within that story. There are parallels between when a story is told in Name of the Wind, don't you dare skip it. Like it is super important. It draws a huge parallel between his story and like what has happened in the past. The characters in it are significant, and Also, he grew up with the Edema Ru, which essentially are roaming storytellers. So yeah,
So the
storytelling's
first thing I want to talk
vastly
about
important.
storytelling, the first thing I want to talk about for storytelling wise is so the first story within a story within a story. So you got three layers, the final third layer that you really hear is so well done by Rothfuss, where you have the like origin stories of the world's main religion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then so you have it being told by someone who is quite probably a priest, right? So it's a very orthodox kind of telling of the origin story of, and it's the same kind of story of like the Jesus Christ story of a God being embodied, God being embodied by a man, and then redeeming the world for our sins and that kind of stuff. It's the same kind of gist. And it's told by a priest, and it's a really good story. Like you start saying it, and you kind of link some details to what's been going on in the book, that kind of thing. And then I don't remember the order of this, Drake. Maybe you can correct me here. And then you get Scarpy's story about Lanre
Mm-hmm.
and the devastation he caused by destroying cities and like pretty much ending civilization as it was known at the time and putting the world to the dark place it is. Not dark, but to the current state it's in, losing all
Mm-hmm.
this knowledge and empires and all that kind of thing. Um, And there's just some parallels in those two stories that you might want to go in further detail,
A,
Drake. Like,
a big parallel is that in the religious story, the demon is chased from city to city and destroys 7 cities. In the more historical depiction of the story, those same cities are destroyed, but in a different way. And there are still demons, like, but there are important details that you begin, if you look at the stories side by side, you can see how they kind of match up, like your fingers coming together, but they just like there are certain things that cross maybe at different points and in different ways, but
mhm.
they still have some of the same tenets. So the but one kind of serves a religious purpose, whereas the other is kind of more of just telling the story how it was. And you kind of see, like, okay, where did things shift? How did things shift? But the fact that there are two different stories telling very similar events means that there's some kernel of truth in there about, like, okay, these events really might have happened.
I think it being two stories gives it a lot more like credibility than
In
just the
depth.
one that you're talking about. And it also fills in more gaps than you could do with one story alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because something about having conflicting stories and it being up to the reader to sit down and be like, okay, I wonder which part of this is true, which part isn't, makes it so much more effective of like world it's effectively a really awesome world building technique Roth has used here,
Well,
right?
history of the world building.
Yeah,
It
because
builds the
he
history
didn't
of the
just
world.
he wasn't like, here reader, here's some plot details about how this world came to be, right? He was like, here's this one story that is very orthodox, right, about how the world works and functions, right? And there's this other story that might be told from a more reliable narrator in Scarpy, in the form of Scarpy. You
Mm-hmm.
don't quite know that. You kind of get the gist. He's more reliable. Um, but then the guy gets arrested for telling the story, right? So it's like it's just a very effective way using that storytelling like mechanism to let the reader know how the world works. And I just love that. And I think he does that several times using the storytelling narrative throughout the whole thing as far as clever structure is
Yeah,
concerned.
and it also goes to show how stories kind of get twisted. That, like, the reason that Quoth even begins to tell his story with the chronicler is because the chronicler makes a point that, like, don't you want your true story told? Like, don't you want your real story told?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is yeah. He wants a history of a more accurate depiction of what happened. And this is kind of showing how details and facts get misconstrued and change over time. And that comes up a lot. The idea that storytelling changes and that facts get twisted, facts get blown out of proportion. That like the people that walk into the bar and walk into the pub start telling a story about Quoth, in front of Quoth that we just heard Quoth's rendition of the story, but then now it's changed. The facts have twisted. Since it wasn't written down, people misremember things, exaggerate different things. Over time, little things change. Timelines get swapped. And you see an example of that with the stories that Sidney's talking about. This religious version where things are exaggerated or things are changed to fit a narrative, where it's a demon instead of a really powerful magician, or it is 7 cities because that's the number they need instead of the actual 6. Like, you see how they're changed through time. And you see miniature versions of that with Quoth's story already happening. We're being told the actual story from Quoth, a narrated version of it, and then we hear a different version from these people that pop up in the pub, and you see,
I'm glad you got to that, Drake, because I was gonna, because like those two stories, right, kind of mirror the setup of the narrator of the current story, and then the told story we're getting through Quoth, right? Because you're aware there's several things that happen throughout the book, like where he ends up having Chronicler cross out some of the things he said about Dinah and that kind of thing, that Quoth doesn't necessarily want the story to be the absolute correct interpretation of how the things happened, right? He wants it like there's a mix there, because he does want it to be truthful. Like the quote in the beginning, he was talking about whether or not he begins telling the story, and he says, "I would tell the truth." And then Quoth says, "Nothing but the truth could break me," right? And so there is definitely an investment in the truth for this story, but it also is pretty clear that it's still a story, you know. It's not an exact retell. I don't think you're getting an exact
leaving
retell.
stuff out that he doesn't want included.
Yep.
And he's focusing on things that are important for you to understand the ending. And that's something I've started to begin to notice is since we know he's not including certain parts, he skips months at a time, weeks at a time. He like when we meet Ari for the first time, it's not the first time that Quoth meets Ari. So that means he's excluded meetings, he's excluding times. So the moments that he chooses to include in the story are important. They're important to build up to a certain moment or to a certain something. And so since he includes so many times of when his actions are then, like, his consequences are then reflected in his actions, like, it's obvious that Quoth, that's an important part of the story for Quoth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the structure just makes you think when you're reading it, you know, like normally you read a story and you're like, this is the story I'm getting. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to enjoy it. You know, I'm going to turn off, like, kind of like watching a movie, at least for me, you know, I'm reading the book. I'm like, okay, you know, we're chilling, just enjoying this. Right. But the structure of this thing is written, it kind of like it keeps you interested in that it's the medium, the way you're getting it, if that makes sense. You don't forget. You don't forget it's a story within a story.
Yeah, I like the commentary on storytelling. It's pretty awesome. You ready to move into the big one?
What's the consequences one? I mean, the consequences is the big one, but it's easy. I mean, it's easy to talk about. I mean, like,
it's so blaringly obvious. But like that last bit about the way, like, storytelling makes me, like, the way that it is emphasized. It is not only the theme of Name of the Wind, it is the theme of Quoth's story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Quoth telling the story to the chronicler, it's the theme of the story he's telling the chronicler. And you can tell that by the way he chooses events to share with the reader.
Absolutely. I think just from a mechanism from Rothfuss's point of view, like, I don't know, you read some things and plot progression happens, and sometimes it feels a little like, why did that happen? You know, like, seems kind of arbitrary, right? But this whole book, it's like Kavoth is learning something, doing pretty well, right? And then he messes up, something happens, and then he get some more learning. He improves his life, it is standing, I guess, or some kind of phrasing like that. And then something happens, you know, and it's like very like, it's not just something arbitrarily happens. It's Kavoth does something, and what he does is not good for him, you know. And it's just a very organic way to tell a story, I think.
and the way people like he keeps showing us people telling him and giving him lessons in um he keeps showing us moments where he's had lessons in, hey, if you don't think things through, bad stuff happens.
Mhm.
Like if you don't think things all the way through, like something bad will happen. He keeps having like his mentors tell him that. Abinthy, Exladal, is the guy at the fishery. Like if you don't think things through, there are consequences. He keeps learning that lesson. That lesson keeps coming up, and it's because he chooses to share those moments, and I think it's because it's leading up to a moment where he's like, I learned this lesson over and over, and I still didn't learn it. I still.
Just go back to the previous thing we talked about. It's just all in the chat because you said it's well spun. It's not linear, and I agree with that very much. It's just not a linear story,
Mhm.
which makes it more interesting to read.
Yeah, I mean, he'll skip months at a time. He'll skip weeks at a time.
Hmm.
Okay, he'll skip weeks at a time. He'll skip months at a time. That was the better emphasis.
There you go. So about the consequences, I mean, what is there to say really? I mean, it's organic, it's effective, right? I think it's going to be very effective if it does speculation hat. If it does end up being like Kibbles does something to, first of all, fuck up the world, and secondly, like Kelsey said earlier, quite possibly to fuck up his relationship with Denna, right?
Mhm.
I think those two actions are almost certainly linked together. Um, or he might have done it. He might have even done something because of Denna, you know. Um,
Well, and I think he's also setting it up as a way to be like, look, I like the more I think about it, I'm like the way he's setting it up as a look. I learned these lessons, but at the same time, sometimes when I would do things recklessly, and he even says it like, he says it at the beginning. He's like, my best like heroic events have been when I haven't thought about something. I've just done it.
mhm.
And so like his whole story is kind of making the case of, yes, I should have thought things through. I didn't think it through. I just went. But he shows that sometimes when he doesn't think things through, shit goes wonderfully. Shit like works out. Like like in great example is the Dracus. He
Mhm.
thinks through the plan to kill the Dracus like 100 times over, and it doesn't go according to plan at all.
At all,
Like
yeah.
absolutely fucks it. It ends up being worse because of his well thought out plan, his well thought out idea. But when he winged it, when he just flew by the seat of his pants, spoiler alert, it works out. It ends up being okay, and yeah. So I think he's making the point of like, hey, look, the world isn't that simple. Like sometimes I can't. I was learning two contradicting lessons. Everyone was telling me like, be careful. Your consequences have actions. If you tie the wind in your lungs to the world outside, you could die. But then the world was showing me, hey, sometimes you just have the talent to just wing it. Like sometimes you just gotta go.
Hmm. I gotta wonder if this whole story is supposed to be kind of, was it once it called a fable? Is that what I remember correctly from
Yeah,
early
a story with a moral.
school? Yeah. Um, it almost seems like Kvoth is setting up his narrative to have that kind of central, because the consequences thing is so repetitive and so consistent. But like you're saying, it's not always, it's not a consequence of unthought action. It's just a consequence of action, if that makes sense. Detached from the intention and thought behind it.
And
Actions have consequences.
and that the the more dangerous thing you start to work with, the the larger the consequences can be.
And
The
I
the
think
more
it's important to specify that consequences that don't necessarily mean negative things.
mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a consequence is always him getting fucked up, right? There's positive consequences.
I'm starting to think that it's more about the scale of your consequences is directly proportional to the scale of power you are chasing. Like it's almost a warning of, be careful of chasing the name of the wind, because that power comes with responsibility. It comes with actions that you can't predict or expect. And the larger sword you wield, the more damage you can do, the more dangerous you are, the more consequences you are. So
So
maybe is it really worth chasing the name of the wind? Because you could kill people.
I kind of I kind of try and resist doing this, but like from my own personal experience, like from going from like high school to college to professional, right? Is that like in my own personal life, that has become very apparent to me, right? So you're in school, you're learning about engineering, science, all this shit, right? You mess up in like you're learning about really cool stuff, right? But it's just a very neutral learning environment where if you mess up, you get a bad grade or whatever, it's not that bad. But like now, it's like there's a lot more responsibility for me to like. This is kind of interesting. Like that's a very true point outside of fiction. It's like the more you're doing, the more dangerous your consequences could be.
The more impact, the more you try to be able to have an impact on the world, the more you have to be wary of the impact that you make because it
Hmm.
could very easily be negative.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Ready to end on your quote?
Yes.
All right,
Uh,
Kelsey, bring out your quote. Let's
I
let's
think we
see a
should
bit
do
of chat.
Kelsey's two quotes first because she says she has two, and I agree with
Yeah.
two is important. Um, I'll do one, you do one, then I'll wrap it up.
Okay. Let's go ahead. We'll wait on Kelsey. Because I also
How
need to.
often does your is there a way to change your Kindle settings so that it doesn't turn off as quickly? I assume there is.
There's probably something somewhere. I wonder if I can look up. Oh, I don't think I don't think I don't really highlight my quotes in my Kindle. I like write them down, and it's not very organized.
Oh, because you have to type it, Kelsey. That sucks.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Actually, we'll take. I can't tell if there's someone else here because I know it's you and I know it's Kelsey, but it says that there's one other person in my chat. There's one other viewer, like actual viewer. Um, and that's awesome. I hope you're here. We're gonna take a small break while we look for our quotes, and I'm gonna use the
I have
restroom
I
while
have my
Kelsey
quote.
types. Yeah, well, while Kelsey's typing hers.
Okay.
Never mind. I guess I'm not because someone's in the bathroom. Well, I guess yeah. What we should do is while she takes the time to type one, we should each do our first one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably a more clever way to do this. So while I'm waiting for mine to load, why don't you go ahead and share yours?
All right, and this isn't even a particularly important one for the story wise. I just love this interaction here. So Eldon's the crazy guy, the crazy master guy who's pretty cracked, but
Absolutely.
still, quite the authority on some of this stuff. And this is after Quoth uses the name of the wind, and Eldon saves his mind effectively, I guess. And he's asking more about how it works, how the naming works, capital N naming works. And Quoth doesn't understand what Eldon's trying to say, and they're talking about like trying to describe a color without using the name of the color.
Oh
And
yeah.
Eldon says, he laid a hand on my shoulder. Using words to talk of words is like using a pencil to draw a picture of itself on itself. Impossible, confusing, frustrating. He lifted his hands high above his head as if stretching for the sky. But there are other ways of understanding, he shouted, laughing like a child. He threw both arms to the cloudless arc of the sky above us, still laughing. Look, he shouted, tilting his head back. Blue, blue, blue. Like, I love that so much, man. Like, it's just so good. Ah,
Mm,
man. Fantastic.
that is fantastic. Like, yeah, talk about it. I'll go
I
off
mean,
on it. So
it doesn't have very many, like, it has some implications story wise, but there's like it's just fantastic. Like reading that makes me smile. Every time I read it, it makes me smile and feel good. It's a very human like interaction, someone excited about their passion. It's just happy, man. It's intense and happy.
it's the idea that I mean, because it's the idea that like just life, like enjoying life. You can talk about it all day, but
It's visceral.
yeah, because he just lifts his arm. He's like, he seems insane, but to think of something as simple as blue, but to be like, no, experience it,
Yeah.
experience the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. Mine is less happy. But it's a quote that I love so much. Um, and it's less of a quote and more of like, well, you see, it's, um, let me see if I can find exactly. Yeah. Whew. This one gets me every time. Um, look behind
Oh
him
man, this is a
instead.
sad one. Oh no. All right, yeah.
Look behind him instead to the circle of light that the fire has made, and leave quoth to himself for now. Everyone deserves a moment or two alone when they desire it. And this is the quote. And if by chance there were tears, let us forgive him. He was just a child after all, and had yet to learn what sorrow really was. And every time I read that, and if by chance there were tears in his eyes, let us forgive him. It is the most beautiful way I have ever heard someone describe someone in sorrow, someone crying. And if there were tears in his eyes, let us forgive him. And followed directly after by that quote of he was a child after all and didn't know what sorrow was. Like how can you describe someone crying so beautifully and then right after follow it with like, yeah, but he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know what sorrow is. He's crying for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He's crying over his dead family, over breaking out of Tarbine, over being in abject poverty. And for quoth to say, and that's just the beginning. Like that sorrow that is deep
Potent.
inside it. That's crazy to me. And if by chance there are tears in his eyes, let us forgive him. It's that scene is one of the most beautifully written scenes I've ever. It's right after him playing for the first time in years. It hands down is probably one of the most beautifully written
Mm-hmm.
that I've ever had. Kelsey's still typing, so I feel like you're free to go ahead and jump into your next quote.
I'm just gonna find it real quick.
Yeah,
It's highlighted, so it won't take me long. But
yeah, I'll find mine as well. I know that I wrote it down. Oh, I know. Yeah, I know exactly which one I'm going to read, and it's a paragraph. This is the paragraph one that I'm like, yeah, it still counts as a quote.
do you want to do yours next then?
Yeah.
Mine,
So
mine's kind of final. So
okay, cool. So this is from chapter 26. And I think it really wraps up imagery. It wraps Patrick Rothfuss's writing style and the way that words, the way they're spoken, is more important necessarily than what they're describing. In the midst of silence, Lyra stood by Lanre's body and spoke his name. Her voice was a commandment. Her voice was steel and stone. Her voice told him to live again. Lanre lay motionless and dead. In the midst of fear, Lyra knelt by Lanre's body and breathed his name. Her voice was a beckoning. Her voice was love and longing. Her voice called him to live again. Lanre lay cold and dead. In the midst of despair, Lyra fell across Lanre's body and wept his name. Her voice was a whisper. Her voice was echo in emptiness. Her voice begged him to live again. Lanre lay breathless and dead. The way Rothfuss changes, that's poetry. It's within that story, and so it gives him a moment to truly dive deep into a poetic voice. And this poetic description of someone's grief is beautiful and haunting because it uses repetition to create a rhythm that then makes you focus on the words that are different. When when he says silence and then instead says fear and then instead says despair, in the midst of silence, in the midst of fear, in the midst of despair, the change is then the focus, and so it draws your attention and your focus to that change. Lyra spoke his name, breathed his name, wept his name. Her voice was a commandment, a beckoning, a whisper. Her voice was steel and stone, love and longing, echo and emptiness. Her voice told him her voice told him to live again. Her voice called him, her voice begged him. Oh, that one gets me. That change, and like that's what it is. It's that change that makes you notice the difference between someone calling someone's name and someone begging someone's name. The way that he uses repetition is an epitome of all the imagery we talked about. All the way Rothfuss's writing style is that's right there. That's a great way of showing like, yeah, he knows what he's doing with his words because
I mean, that repetition that you're talking about there, it literally acts like this big, huge magnifying glass on the word choice of what is changing there, right? It just makes you like at the beginning. I think I don't have it in front of me, so I can't quote it exactly. But it does not say her voice was a command. It says her voice was a commandment, right? Just like
yes.
that, the subtle like. I could literally go through that section that you just read for hours talking about like why the words that he chose versus words that he like. It's just so masterful
You could write
in
an
the
essay
artistry of
about
this.
that alone.
Literally, you could like literally, I could sit down and enjoy writing for 3 hours, write, a couple hundred words, maybe, probably more about why that is so good.
And
Like,
it reflects he does that in so that's a story within a story within a story. That writing style and that is actually repeated in the prologue and epilogue of the entire book. That literary device of using repetition to then draw focus to the words that are different.
and
It's
that so my quote is the last paragraph of the epilogue, by the way.
okay.
Um,
Hold on before you go. Let's share Kelsey's.
oh yeah, it's the one. It's the same one that we talked about a while ago, which is just so good.
It is such
Oh
a
my
good one.
gosh.
There's like I'm glad I'm so happy she brought this one up because as an actor, it is so true, and I like am really appreciate that she brought it up. Why don't you go ahead and
Mhm.
read it, Sydney?
Uh, you see, a laurel needs rain to grow. I can't do much about that, but I can keep that rain off a few musicians' heads, can't I? So God will tend the laurels and keep them wet, and I will tend the players and keep them dry. And wiser kids than mine will decide when to bring the two together. Like, and for reference, this is for Count Therapist talking to Quoth about donations to musicians and that kind of stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
keeping them fed and clothed. And it is just so good, man. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm. There, yeah, and it shows you the power of a patron, and it's this very succinct way to describe like why patrons should exist, why people should be
it
patrons.
it's not. I mean, like for me, it's also just like, oh, minds instead of, and wiser
Yeah,
minds than mine. Okay, then
yeah, I was
kids.
gonna
Okay.
mention that. Yeah, that last little bit should be, and wiser minds than mine will decide when to bring the two together.
Uh, I think that quote somehow, like what, that's like 6 lines in a Twitch chat, right? Which is not a very dense, like containment. Um, not just does a good job of like, the value of the patron and like, but it does a good job of summing up the value of like art, like something worth saving and worth spending resources to nurture, like, and it just does a really good job of summing up so much value. It's like somehow so little words.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So, Kelsey, unfortunately, we didn't get your first quote, but I'm going to go ahead and let Sydney take it away and close us out with his because I know what quote he's talking about, and it is a very final quote, and I'm really looking forward to it.
um, so honestly, if I could do it, my quotes would have been the prologue and the epilogue. But like Jake mentioned earlier, there is some repetition here, but it's just the last paragraph of the epilogue. Um, the wasteland was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, and it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's endings. It was heavy as a great river smooth stone. It was the patient cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. Um, and like talking about word choice, right? Being able to write an essay on each word that is included here. Each word in this paragraph is critical to the meaning of what you get out of it, right? And I think the most important, I think we've been over this before, Drake, is the cut flower sound of a man waiting to die. So you cut a flower, right? And it sits there. And as far as the flower is concerned, visually, it looks fine, right? But you cut a flower, you know within 3 days that thing's going to be turning brown and dying. It's actively dying as it sits there. It's mostly dead, in fact, once you cut it. And so it's such a good job of showing that Kvothe might seem to be this passionate, lifeful kind of character, but functionally he is dead, right? He is a cut flower.
And his color and that vibrance you see in the flower, it's slowly fading.
Yep.
And if someone doesn't come and pick up and save it, it's gonna die.
And the paragraph in front of that is the man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes are dark and distant, and he moves with the weary calm that comes from knowing many things. I think that does a really good job of tying back into that cut flower imagery as well, because the flame imagery, it's dying down.
Thank you for sharing that quote, man. That was a good one.
It does. I don't think he could have ended this book better.
I hesitate ever to say things are my favorite or things are the best because I hate using hyperbole. I hate using like superlatives. I feel like people use them too often. But the more I read this book, I think it really easily could be my favorite book. It is the content, the writing style. It's phenomenal. I just want to share it with everyone. It's a book that I could reread again and again and again and again. And I feel like every time I could focus on something new and focus on something different and enjoy it for a different reason and enjoy it. Like, it just has that much to it.
Mm-hmm. It really does. It's so it's just so deep. The whole thing. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Well, with that's a wrap on our first official book club. We finished a full book. And we start the new year on that, by the way. That's
that's really convenient actually.
Yeah,
Nice.
we go ahead and start the new year. We'll count that book to our this year count. So for anyone who doesn't know, we've now started our gimmick, which is Squid is going to choose a book each week, and I'm going to choose a book each week. So you can choose to follow along with Squid's, and you'll have a book to read every 2 weeks, or you'll be able to follow with mine and have a fantasy fiction book to read every 2 weeks. His are going to be more educational, nonfiction type things. I'm not restricted to that territory if he wants to include a fiction book, but just the books he often chooses are going to be of nonfiction. Or you can do the hardcore thing and read every book. Join us each week, and we're going to dive into these just like we did on this. We're going to choose things to focus on. We're going to try to give you a good summary of what they are in general so that if you didn't read it, you can still enjoy our conversation. So even if you don't read Sidney's book for next week, please come back and join us because we are going to try and get you caught up.
This book is it's a very good thing even to not read and just hear us talk about, because it's literally very factual and informative. So just hearing some of the stuff talked about, very helpful, I think.
Yeah. And go ahead. How about this, Sidney? Go ahead and you introduce the book for next week, and then I'll introduce the book for 2 weeks from now.
Okay. I did earlier when you were away, Drake. But this book is Fate of Food by Amanda Little. It's a really, really cool, impactful summary of the current industrial food system. And the reason I like this so much is books on this subject and essays and stuff on the subject tend to be either I'm a vegan and I don't want anything to happen bad to animals and very pro-environment, which is a very fair, valid point. I'm not trashing on that at all. But using that viewpoint to write a piece of media does take something away from the ability to convey information about the current system that we use. And this book does a very good job of being like, the system we currently use is not the best system there could possibly be, but it does have its benefits. And it certainly has its drawbacks as you find this book. So it's just really awesome stuff to learn about, I think.
Yeah. And so usually that would be, that wouldn't be included because that would be the following week and that'd be already introduced. But because we're doing this for the first time, now you're going to get two new books thrown at you. The new book is going to be my edition, which will be due on January 16th. And I use due loosely come join us either way. We'd love to talk. So read Fate of Food by January 9th. On January 16th is Drake's book, which is The Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It's a sci-fi fiction book about a future where we have colonized other planets. But in order to do that, we have had to become more specialized and resulted in classes that are distinctive by color. It is a great book, I think. The plot is fantastic. The science nature of it, like, I don't know how accurate things are, but it does a really cool job of like making it very fun and science fiction-y. I love the book. I think everyone else will too. So that is my suggestion for 2 weeks from now. Next week, read A Fate of Food by Amanda. What's her last name?
Little.
Little. And we will read you next time. See you then.
Did you see hate to interrupt the outro there, but did you see Kelsey's it only took 3 hours to talk about the last half of it?
Hey, I resent that. It took us 2.5 hours, not 3.